There's been 8 new cases of coronavirus confirmed in New South Wales alone, which takes it up to a total of 55 statewide. I spoke with New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard just a short time ago on the coronavirus issue.
8 recorded actually over last night, and the official numbers at the moment are 55, but I would expect that during the course of today the numbers will increase, and we'll know more about that a bit later on in the evening. The 55 represents a number of people who've come in from overseas, and we'd all remember the first 4 all came in from the Wuhan in Hebei province. But as it has continued, it's expanded out, and we've had people coming in from many places actually, but Iran was the next, I'd say, next major group of people. We've had people coming in from South Korea, but also others now from Hong Kong, Singapore, a number of other Asian ports. So we're up to 55. Within that group, there's also quite a number now that have been actually transmitted onshore. Initially, of course, we were reasonably happy that we'd had no transmissions, but the last week we've seen an increase, which is to be expected. People have come in and not realised they've had the virus, and those transmissions have occurred. But can I say, I think it's important, Peter, for everybody to know that around about 80% of people who are coming under the virus, or catching the virus, are actually doing pretty well worldwide. And certainly here in New South Wales, that's been our experience. We've got quite a number who are actually in isolation at home with the virus, and others in hospital, particularly in the early stages where we wanted to be particularly careful. So 80% of people will do quite well. The others, we have to do some intervention to make sure they are well looked after, and of course, best health systems in the world here in Australia, so everything's going pretty well at this stage.
You mentioned that Australia does have a terrific health system, and that is the case. Now, if this particular virus spreads and the contagion really takes hold, are you confident that we have the ICU preparedness to deal with a mass outbreak?
Well, first of all, I'd say Australia-wide, all of the health systems are talking to each other, so each state and territory has its own health system, but we're talking with each other, also talking extensively with the federal government and Minister Hunt and Brendan Murphy, Chief Health Officer for the country. And I'd say that at this point everybody's on high alert and moving into that preparedness case. In New South Wales, I attended a meeting yesterday afternoon at about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, which involved all of our local, we have 15 local health districts in New South Wales. So all of the chief executives were online. There were about 60 people in the room, including the head of ambulance and so on. And what we were looking at was, if it does get worse, if it does, then how do we manage those situations, or that situation? And I'm confident that New South Wales Health is looking forward to a what-if situation, a worst-case scenario in effect, and looking at, for example, do we need space? If we need spaces in our public hospital system, how do we free it up? And I said on the weekend that it might be a partnership with the community, because some people might be asked, for example, if they've had a niggly knee for 6 months or so and they were expecting to get operated on in an elective surgery, not an urgent surgery, they might be asked to put it off for a while so we can free up beds and free up operating facilities. I think that's the sort of thing that we'll be doing, but we're also as late as this evening, I was talking to health officials about each of our public hospitals establishing alternate routes for people with respiratory disorders, respiratory issues, to not be coming through our emergency departments, and that's progressing well. So there'll be a lot of steps taken, calmly, considered, and I'm quite confident that our health system is moving in the right direction.
Brad, you're a senior cabinet minister in the New South Wales government. We've had a pretty full-on sort of summer. We've had drought, bushfires. Now we've got this coronavirus. How's the mood?
And floods in there too, Peter.
Right,
floods as well.
And floods in there, yeah. How's the mood within cabinet?
Oh, look, I think we're very lucky. We have a fantastic leader. Gladys Berejiklian is a very calm person. I don't think I've ever seen Premier Berejiklian raise her voice or or do anything other than be very ordered in her thinking, and she leads the Cabinet extremely well. So I think Cabinet, right throughout these issues, have been quite prepared to manage it and work with the community. One or two of our members have actually, well, actually more than one or two, but particularly in the Cabinet, one or two members have experienced, for example, the bushfires firsthand, and they bring a more personal experience, and that's good to have that in the Cabinet. But at this stage, I'd say the mood is positive. We're very conscious of the fact that we also have to be keeping the business of government moving. There are a lot of things happening, certainly the worldwide economic issues. We need to make sure that we don't take our foot off the major public infrastructure that we're building. I mean, just in this 4-year period, we're building about $10 billion worth of new hospitals just in my area. So we want to make sure all those things continue, because they mean jobs and they mean driving the economy at the same time as we're dealing with these other issues. But, you know, government wasn't meant to be easy. Government's meant to be managed and to do what you need to do, and that's, I think, certainly what we're doing here in New South Wales.
You mentioned today that closing schools will be the new norm. Do you expect more schools to be closed?
Yes, I do. I actually said that yesterday during a press conference, because we had one school issue that arose. It was Epping High School, which, for those of you who aren't in Sydney, is within the Sydney region, and that came to my attention on Thursday afternoon last week, and we had to make urgent decisions, and that's what government does. But we were looking at, with this particular event, how would we deal with it, and we decided with education, so health, education, collaboratively decided that closing the school for one day, and then we're lucky on that occasion because we had the weekend as well, would allow the health people to go quietly about what they call tracing, and that is looking at the contacts that that student had had. And that worked extremely well. It also allowed time for the school to be fully cleansed by a team of experts. So now we've had a similar situation occur yesterday. I think it was early to mid-morning from memory. Excuse me for not being precise, but there's a lot happening in this area at the present time. But it was probably mid-morning. The issue became we had one young lass, year 7 at Willoughby Girls High School, which is also in Sydney. And we had 2 year 10 students at St Patrick's Marist at Dundas, which is more in the western part of Sydney. And those students had tested positive, so the question then became, well, what do we do now at this stage of the day? And the decision was taken fairly quickly based on our both our planning and our experience of the week before with Epping, that we should close the school. And parents were contacted, and the Secretary of Education and the Minister here, Sarah Mitchell, informed me that within an hour and a half, in the case of both schools, almost all students, in fact I think Willoughby was complete, in an hour and a half all students had left the school. So parents, the community are all listening to the messages, and they're on high alert too, so when they get a message from their school that we want you to come, parents are not delaying, and that's a very positive thing. And I think that just shows the awareness of the community to this issue. And most people are being very, very collaborative and community-minded. There was no angst, so I think that's a positive.
Minister, before we go, what do you say to our viewers, predominantly from the regions, who would be no doubt concerned, upset about what's going on right now?
Look, again, at the meeting that I had yesterday afternoon with all of the LHDs, we were talking to our 15 LHDs, as I said earlier, and that included the ones through the regions. And we were putting them on high alert and being aware that whilst it hasn't become highly problematic yet in the regions, there's every chance it will be on the basis of transmission and on the basis of experience overseas. So we are putting our regional hospitals on alert, and we're also making sure, I had discussions today with senior health officials about how we might make sure that, for example, pathology testing is done where appropriate, that pathology testing is done and that we get the samples, the specimens, to pathology as quickly as possible. Now, the issue hasn't been resolved yet, but it's well and truly on my radar and the senior health officials. And the issue that I was putting to the senior health officials was, if it's a 6 or 7 hour drive to the nearest pathology unit, how can we actually accelerate that? Is there some other way? Can we do it by, for example, air delivery? Those things are being considered, and I can assure the community that they are very much in the minds of senior members of the Berejiklian government, and I believe all of the Labor and Liberal governments. I mean, obviously we're a Liberal national government here in New South Wales, but I have confidence. I'm talking to ministers right around this country, and I have faith in each and every one of those governments and ministers to be doing what they need to do. I would just give this one request to the community. This time of the year, we know that respiratory issues arise, coughs, colds, flu, and it's certainly on the increase. Our early statistics are showing that flu seems to be on the increase, or earlier than normal. Although having said that, it might just be because there's more respiratory testing going on. But there's got to be a balance here, because if you have what you probably think is a normal cough or cold, then I would, unless you've had contact with a COVID-19 carrier, or unless you have come from a jurisdiction overseas where it's possible that you've had a connection, I certainly wouldn't be saying to you must rush off to have a testing, because if you do, what you're actually doing is probably going to ensure that if we have too many people doing that, our pathology facilities will be tied up doing a whole lot of tests which are completely unnecessary. And I go back to the point that 80% of people are going to have a very mild illness anyway. So let's make sure that we rationally use our health services and make sure that our families and our friends who might have good reason to be having a test are having those tests. So it's a balancing act. If you're really concerned, there is a national telephone line, and I'm sorry I don't have it immediately available, but I'll have one of my staff get that to you, Peter, and you can perhaps put it up so that people can talk to that national line and get some advice on whether or not they should be having tests. But just approach it calmly, and we'll all get through this quite well.